Think your job's demanding? Try being a samurai. One mistake, and you didn't just get fired. You got erased. These warriors weren't just fighting battles. They were surviving under 15 secret rules that controlled everything they did. From what they wore to how they thought, nothing was truly their choice. And the first rule, loyalty above all. No questions, no hesitation. To a samurai, loyalty wasn't just a virtue. It was their entire reason for existing. From the moment a samurai pledged himself to a lord, his soul wasn't his anymore. His sword, his honor, his future, all of it belonged to one person. If his master succeeded, he shared the glory. But if his master fell, he was expected to fall with him, even if that meant following him straight into death. This wasn't symbolic. Samurai loyalty was enforced by law, culture, and fear. A samurai who turned against his lord was branded as Girinin, a man without honor, a ghost walking among the living. The punishment? Exile, execution, or worse, the loss of one's name. In feudal Japan, being forgotten was a fate more terrifying than death itself. But what's wild is that loyalty wasn't always fair. A samurai could be ordered to take his own life for something his lord did wrong, and he'd still obey without question, because to refuse wasn't just disobedience. It was proof that your spirit was weak. That kind of defiance didn't just ruin reputations, it ended bloodlines. There's even a famous saying from the Edo period. A samurai's master is his heaven, meaning his lord's word wasn't just authority, it was divine. You didn't challenge heaven, you obeyed, even when it meant killing your friends, your enemies, or sometimes your own family. Stories like the 47 Ronin show how deep this ran. When their master was forced to take his own life, these samurai became outlaws, not because they betrayed him, but because they stayed too loyal. They avenged his death, knowing it would cost them their lives. And when their mission was complete, they turned themselves in and died with honor. To the samurai, that wasn't tragedy. That was duty done right. Their loyalty was their pride, their purpose, and their prison, all at once. But loyalty could only take you so far. That's where the next rule stepped in, one that twisted every samurai's sense of right and wrong into something far more complicated. To a samurai, honor wasn't just an idea, it was everything. It decided who you could stand beside, who you could serve, even how you were remembered after death. A man without honor wasn't just disgraced, he was invisible. In the samurai world, your name was your legacy. Every action, every decision, every battle you fought was a reflection of that name. One moment of shame could undo a lifetime of service, and once that stain appeared, there was no washing it away. Honor was so fragile, yet so absolute. Lose it, and your family's future fell with you. Wives were shunned, children ostracized, ancestors forgotten. The pressure to uphold it was suffocating. But that pressure also created warriors who feared dishonor more than death itself. That fear shaped everything about how a samurai lived. They were trained to show calm even when their blood boiled, to bow when insulted, and to die before admitting failure. Every emotion was filtered through the lens of honor. It wasn't about how they felt. It was about how they were seen, and if that honor ever cracked, there was only one way to restore it. Through seppuku, ritual self-destruction. It wasn't seen as despair, it was seen as discipline, a final declaration that a samurai's integrity couldn't be taken from him, only surrendered by choice. It was painful, tragic, and revered all at once. Families even honored those deaths as the ultimate act of loyalty, but the code of honor had a dark side. Because what happened when truth clashed with that same code? When doing the right thing meant defying your master, or worse, exposing his weakness. That's when another rule came into play, one that demanded honesty, but punished it all the same. To a samurai, truth wasn't just expected, It was sacred. Their word carried the weight of their soul. A single lie could shatter the trust that bound warrior to lord, and once broken, that trust could never be rebuilt. In the samurai world, your tongue could be deadlier than your sword. Every promise was a vow, every statement a reflection of your spirit. Samurai were taught from childhood that lying wasn't just dishonorable, it was corrupting. A dishonest man wasn't seen as clever, he was seen as rotting from within. Even the smallest deceit could spread like a stain, one that no apology could erase. But here's the cruel part. Sometimes, telling the truth could destroy you just as fast. If a lord made a mistake, or if the truth threatened his image, the samurai was trapped. He could speak honestly and risk death, or stay silent and carry the weight of dishonor. Loyalty demanded silence, honor demanded honesty. And in between those two unbreakable codes stood the samurai, torn apart by his own ideals. There are countless stories of warriors who tried to balance both. Some chose the truth and paid with their lives. Others chose silence and lived with the shame. Neither path was easy, and neither was truly right. The rule of truthful word wasn't about morality, it was about identity. A samurai's speech had to match his soul. If he said he'd fight to the death, he did. If he swore to protect his master, he meant it, no matter the cost. That's why breaking your word wasn't just lying, it was spiritual death. Even in times of peace, this rule lingered. Contracts, oaths, and personal promises held a sacred weight that defined the samurai class long after the age of war had ended. In a world full of blades, their word was still the sharpest weapon they had. But truth wasn't the only burden they carried. Because even if a samurai stayed loyal, honorable, and truthful, there was one more rule that decided everything he did. A rule that controlled his choices, his actions, and even his fate. Even the most loyal and honorable warrior could not act solely on personal desire. Duty was the invisible chain that bound every move, every decision. Every samurai carried obligations to his lord, his clan, and his family. Obligations that often demanded more than life itself. Duty wasn't a suggestion. It was a law written in the heart. A mission left unfinished, a promise unkept, or a command ignored could bring shame not just on the individual, but on generations to come. Children inherited the consequences of a father's failure, as if the mistakes were carved into the family crest. Daily life revolved around these duties. Training was endless, chores were sacred, and orders were executed with precision. Even small missteps, a tardy appearance, a sloppy bow, a forgotten task, could be noticed, criticized, or remembered for years. Some duties were practical, guarding a lord's estate, maintaining weapons, overseeing land. Others were ceremonial, bound to traditions older than most warriors could name. And some were cruel, forcing men to act against friends, or to sacrifice personal happiness for obligations that felt unbearable. Yet fulfilling duty was a source of pride. Completing a task correctly, no matter how menial or dangerous, proved a warrior's worth. It tied honor, loyalty, and skill into one seamless whole. The samurai's life was measured not by wealth or comfort, but by how faithfully he carried out these obligations. And still, duty could be unforgiving. A single failure, no matter the reason, could spiral into dishonor, punishment, or even death. Every choice had consequences, and every action was weighed against the balance of duty. But duty alone wasn't enough. Discipline required control over temper, desire, and impulses. Without restraint, a warrior's loyalty, honor, and truthfulness could all crumble, no matter how fierce his sword is. Self-control wasn't only about behavior in battle, it applied to every aspect of life. A samurai couldn't indulge in excess. Food or drink couldn't let anger or jealousy dictate actions, and couldn't allow fear to cloud judgment. Every decision, every movement, even every expression was measured, disciplined, intentional. The greatest battles weren't always fought on the battlefield. They were fought in the mind between duty and desire, pride and patience, passion and reason. Losing that inner war could make a warrior reckless, dishonorable, or dangerous, not just to himself, but to those around him. Training was rigorous, but it extended far beyond martial skills. Meditation, ritual, and constant reflection were all part of cultivating a calm, unshakable mind. A samurai's reputation could hinge on restraint, a measured word in the face of insult, a careful pause before action, a choice to act strategically, rather than impulsively. Even relationships were shaped by this discipline. Friendships, alliances, and family bonds required patience and tact, and succumbing to emotion could carry disastrous consequences. The code demanded balance, strength, tempered by restraint, courage guided by reason. But self-control wasn't simply about virtue, it was survival. A samurai who lost control could fail in duty, lose honor, or betray loyalty, and any one of those failures could be fatal. Discipline was the invisible armor, protecting not just body, but reputation, family, and legacy. And, while restraint ruled the mind and heart, samurai were also bound in simpler ways, by how they lived day to day. Life as a samurai wasn't about luxury. Every possession, every meal, every moment of leisure was measured and intentional. Excess was dangerous. It distracted the mind, weakened the body, and invited shame. Wealth without purpose was a trap. Comfort, a liability. Samurai lived by simplicity. Clothes were plain, tools were functional, and homes were modest. Even meals were carefully rationed, designed to fuel the body without indulgence. There was no room for extravagance, no time for unnecessary adornment. Every coin, every item, every morsel had a role, and straying from that balance could bring dishonor. But frugality was more than practicality. It was a mindset, a discipline that reinforced self-control and loyalty. By rejecting luxury, samurai proved they could endure hardship, remain focused on duty, and resist temptation. Simple living sharpened the mind, strengthened the body, and clarified purpose. It wasn't about deprivation, it was about mastery. A samurai who could live with less could fight with more, think more clearly, and act decisively. Possessions became tools, not distractions. Comfort became unnecessary. In a world where one wrong step could cost life and legacy, simplicity wasn't just wise, it was survival. Even social interactions reflected this rule. Gifts, meals, and celebrations were modest, intentional, and symbolic. Flaunting wealth or status was considered vulgar, and it could stain one's honor just as surely as a failed mission. Every choice reinforced the warrior's discipline, showing that he valued principle over pleasure. However, discipline and simplicity were nothing without respect. In every action, samurai were measured not only by skill, but by how they treated others. Manners weren't optional, they were survival. A careless word or a slight gesture could spark conflict, ruin a reputation, or even end in violence. Respect extended to everyone: lords, fellow warriors, servants, and even enemies. Bowing at the right moment, speaking at the correct tone, and observing social hierarchies were all essential. These rituals weren't just tradition. They maintained order in a world where one misstep could ripple into disaster. Even in battle, etiquette mattered. Attacking dishonorably, striking from behind, or showing cruelty to the defeated was shameful. A samurai's skill alone didn't earn admiration. It had to be paired with honor and proper conduct. Respect also shaped alliances and rivalries. Friendships were maintained through careful consideration of hierarchy and obligation, and disputes were often resolved with ritualized gestures rather than open aggression. It was a delicate balance, but mastery of etiquette allowed samurai to navigate both the battlefield and the court with precision. This awareness of others, their rank, their role, their expectations, was a skill honed as carefully as swordsmanship. By practicing respect, samurai ensured that discipline, loyalty, and honor extended beyond themselves and shaped the world around them. But life for a samurai was never guaranteed, and death was never distant. They trained, fought, and lived as if each day could be their last. This wasn't fear, it was preparation. Facing death calmly was a skill as vital as wielding a sword. The mindset of embracing mortality shaped every choice. Battles were entered without hesitation, duels fought without doubt, and loyalty carried to the point of ultimate sacrifice. A samurai who feared death risked hesitation, and hesitation could be fatal, not just for himself, but for those depending on him. Even outside the battlefield, death influenced decisions. Planning for survival, managing resources, and fulfilling duties were all done with an awareness that life was fleeting. This constant presence of mortality forged discipline, courage, and clarity of purpose. Some embraced ritual death to preserve honor, performing seppuku to atone for failure or restore dignity. Others acted decisively in combat, knowing that courage in the face of death was the truest measure of a warrior. Accepting the inevitability of death didn't make them reckless. It made every action deliberate, every word measured, every step purposeful. In this acceptance, samurai found freedom. By acknowledging that life could end at any moment, they could live fully within the constraints of loyalty, duty, and honor. Yet even in this fearless approach to death, there was a rule that dictated how they should meet it. A grim ritual that demanded precision, courage, and unwavering discipline. When honor was lost, there was a way to reclaim it, and it was as severe as it sounds. Seppuku, the ritual of self-disembowelment, was the ultimate test of courage, discipline, and commitment to the code. It wasn't chosen lightly, and it wasn't meant to be easy. Seppuku was both punishment and redemption. A samurai who failed his lord, his clan, or his own principles could restore honor only through this act. It was deliberate, methodical, and ceremonial. A declaration that dignity mattered more than life itself. The act was painful, public, and final, but it preserved the soul's integrity in a society where shame could linger for generations. Preparation was meticulous. Samurai dressed in white, composed themselves, and wrote a death poem reflecting on life, duty, and regret. Every motion, every word was measured. This was no desperate gesture. It was a controlled, conscious confrontation with mortality. To survive the shame of dishonor, they embraced the ultimate discipline. Even for those who witnessed it, seppuku was a lesson. It reinforced loyalty, respect, and courage across the ranks. It was a reminder that the code wasn't abstract. It had consequences, and those consequences were absolute. The weight of seppuku shaped decisions long before the act itself became necessary. Every action, every word, every choice was informed by the possibility of this final accountability. In the world of the samurai, failure wasn't just personal, it was a wound to the social order, and the remedy demanded courage few could imagine. Seppuku defined the extreme of discipline and honor, but there were also rules that governed everyday life in smaller, yet still deadly ways. In the strict hierarchy of feudal Japan, respect wasn't optional, it was enforceable. Kirisute Gomen was the grim rule that allowed a samurai to strike down a commoner who insulted or disrespected him. This wasn't bloodlust. It was legal, sanctioned, and tied directly to honor. The principle was simple: an affront to a samurai's dignity demanded immediate response. Words or gestures that others might brush off could provoke lethal consequences. This power reinforced the social order, but it also demanded careful judgment. Killing without cause could itself bring punishment, disgrace, or loss of status. Executing Kirisute Gomen required precision and discipline. The attack had to be swift, justified, and immediately reported to authorities. There was no room for hesitation or impulsive violence. Even the most controlled strike could spiral into scandal if it violated the letter of the law. This rule exemplified the paradox of samurai life. They were bound by loyalty, honor, and duty, yet entrusted with powers that could end lives instantly. A samurai's sword was both a tool of protection and a weapon of accountability, constantly reminding him of the fragile line between justice and shame. Kirisuta Gomen also reinforced social hierarchy. Commoners knew their place, but samurai knew theirs as well. With power came responsibility. They couldn't simply act on anger. They had to balance discipline, law, and honor. Every strike, every encounter was a lesson in control and consequence. Even outside the battlefield, this rule-shaped behavior. A samurai's presence commanded respect. His decisions demanded attention, and his judgment carried weight. Living under such scrutiny was exhausting, but it ensured that every action, every word, every glance reflected the rigor of the code. And while this law applied to moments of conflict, samurai were also bound by broader obligations, leading to their lives never being their own. Personal desires, ambitions, and comforts were always secondary to the needs of the family and the wider network of allegiance. Every action was weighed against its impact on the clan. Decisions were rarely private. They echoed through generations. Success elevated not just the individual, but the entire lineage. Failure brought shame to ancestors, relatives, and descendants alike. A samurai who put personal gain above clan interest risked dishonor, exile, or even death. Even marriages, inheritances, and friendships were influenced by this rule. Personal happiness could not outweigh the strategic needs of the clan. A samurai might be ordered to marry for alliance, rather than love, or to relinquish personal wealth to strengthen family standing. Every choice was an investment in the collective future. This rule extended to warfare as well. Sacrificing one's life to protect the clan was not heroic. It was expected. Retreat for self-preservation could be considered cowardice. Survival mattered only insofar as it served the clan. This constant subordination of personal interest forged warriors who were disciplined, fearless, and utterly dependable. Even in everyday life, the rules shaped behavior. Meals, training, and duties weren't about comfort or leisure. They were about maintaining strength and readiness for the clan's benefit. It created a relentless rhythm of discipline and sacrifice, where private wants were always suppressed in favor of collective obligation. But even with all these burdens, the samurai found meaning. Serving the clan gave every action purpose, and every sacrifice felt part of something larger than the individual. Still, living under this constant pressure demanded another layer of self-mastery, the ability to endure, adapt, and prioritize above one's own heart. Training began at dawn and often lasted until dusk. Samurai practiced endlessly, not just for combat, but to instill focus, patience, and resilience. A single misstep could cost a duel, a battle, or even a life. Excellence wasn't measured by victories alone. It was measured by consistency, composure, and control under pressure. But martial skill extended beyond the battlefield. It shaped etiquette, decision-making, and even speech. A samurai's mind and body were inseparable. Precision in one reinforced discipline in the other. Sharpening the sword was as important as sharpening the mind, and vice versa. Even daily routines reinforced martial excellence. Walking, sitting, and performing chores were all done with intentionality, building the same focus and control required in combat. Every action became a form of practice, every choice a rehearsal for the moment when skill might mean life or death. Yet perfection came with pressure. Mistakes were unforgiving, and laziness could bring dishonor. The samurai, who neglected, training risked more than failure. He risked disgrace and, in extreme cases, death. Excellence was demanded in all circumstances, not just in battle, but in every corner of life. Martial excellence created warriors who could face any challenge with precision and calm. But no matter how skilled a samurai became, there were limits, rules and obligations that even the sharpest blade couldn't overcome. Samurais were trained to master not just technique, but their own hearts. Fear, anger, desire, every emotion had to be acknowledged, then restrained. Letting passion dictate action was a path to ruin. Emotional restraint applied to every part of life. In battle, losing composure could mean hesitation, mistakes, or death. Outside of combat, uncontrolled emotion could bring shame, weaken alliances, or damage relationships. A samurai's honor depended on his ability to remain measured, no matter how intense the situation. Desires, too, were tightly governed. Wealth, comfort, or personal pleasure could never outweigh duty or loyalty. Indulging in them was seen as weakness, a distraction from the path of the warrior. Even love and friendship had to be balanced carefully, weighed against obligations and the greater good. This control was cultivated through discipline, meditation, and constant self-reflection. Every moment became a test. To act deliberately, rather than impulsively, to temper joy with prudence and grief with dignity, samurai learned that mastery over self was as important as mastery over the sword. The rule of restraint was harsh but liberating. By controlling emotion, samurai could act decisively, think clearly, and face danger without hesitation. It forged warriors who were not only strong, but steady, reliable, and unshakable. Yet even the most disciplined hearts were tested. Human nature is not easily tamed, and temptation could appear in countless forms. That's where the next principle, the rule that shaped how samurai approached wealth, possessions, and indulgence, came into play. Samurai carried little, yet owned enough. Life under the code demanded simplicity. Possessions weren't symbols of wealth or status. They were tools, carefully chosen for necessity and practicality. Luxury was a distraction, indulgence a weakness. Clothing was functional, armor maintained with precision, and weapons kept razor sharp. Homes were sparse, meals modest, and leisure strictly limited. Every item had a purpose, excess had no place. This wasn't deprivation, it was discipline. By reducing wants, samurai sharpened focus, strengthened resolve, and ensured that their lives revolved around duty rather than comfort. Frugality also reinforced honor and respect. Extravagance could invite envy or criticism, undermining reputation. A disciplined samurai knew that appearances reflected character. Maintaining simplicity wasn't just practical, it was moral. Every choice, from food to tools to clothing, was a reflection of mastery over desire. Even the smallest possessions were treated with reverence. A sword was more than a weapon, it was an extension of the warrior. A well-kept armor set was a reflection of pride and responsibility. Everything had its place, and every item required care, respect, and purpose. This focus on frugality and minimalism created clarity. By removing distractions, samurai could devote energy to skill, loyalty, and honor. Their lives were lean, disciplined, and precise. Each element aligned with the code that governed every action. Possessions were few, but responsibility was endless. And that responsibility extended beyond self-discipline to how samurai faced the final, ultimate test, death. Death was never far from a samurai's mind. Every decision, every battle, every choice was made with an awareness of mortality. Life was fragile, fleeting, and unpredictable, and the code demanded that warriors accept it without hesitation. Preparing for death wasn't morbid. It was practical, disciplined, and necessary. Samurai trained, planned, and acted as if their last day could arrive at any moment. Weapons were maintained, tactics rehearsed, and families protected, all while maintaining honor, loyalty, and composure. This constant presence of mortality shaped behavior and character. It forged courage, sharpened focus, and clarified purpose. Fear of death was irrelevant. Fear of dishonor was the true danger. By accepting life's impermanence, samurai could act decisively, live deliberately, and embrace the code fully. Even in times of peace, the awareness of death guided choices. Meditations, rituals, and reflections on mortality ensured readiness, not just for the battlefield, but for life itself. Facing death was the ultimate test of all other rules: loyalty, honor, discipline, restraint, and frugality. In the end, the samurai's life was a balance of paradoxes: strength and restraint, loyalty and honesty, skill and humility, life and death. Every rule was a guide, every principle a compass, shaping warriors capable of unparalleled focus, courage, and purpose. The 15 rules of the samurai weren't just guidelines, they were a way of life. Loyalty demanded sacrifice. Honor required vigilance. Duty outweighed desire. Control tempered power. Minimalism clarified purpose. And death was not feared, but understood and embraced. Together, these rules forged warriors whose influence extended far beyond the battlefield. They shaped families, communities, and even culture for centuries. Every choice, every action, every breath was governed by the code. A life lived in devotion to something greater than oneself. It's easy to see the samurai as mere warriors, but their true power lay not in their swords, but in the discipline, courage, and principles that guided every moment. In a world defined by strict rules and constant danger, the samurai didn't just survive, they became legendary. And while centuries have passed, the lessons of their code still resonate today. Discipline, honor, courage, and purpose are timeless, rules we might all benefit from, whether wielding a sword or simply navigating life itself.